A cool morning breeze swept through the tree-lined streets of Maplewood, a charming small city that perfectly balanced modern living with a cozy, tight-knit feel. Sophie Mendoza stepped off the city bus and inhaled deeply, noting how the fresh air tasted faintly of roasted coffee beans and vanilla from the bakery across the road. She was 28 and determined to do something meaningful with her life, once she figured out exactly what that was. Despite her relentless optimism, she often felt weighed down by student loans, a rent that seemed to climb every year, and the silent worry that she'd never quite make it. But Maplewood also had that spark of possibility in every corner, and Sophie thrived on that hope. She worked part-time at an artsy cafe on 7th Avenue, which served as the perfect vantage point to observe the hustle of the city. It was also a convenient job while she saved money to grow her small online art store. Sophie loved painting watercolors, images of quaint streets, bright flowers, and whimsical scenes that made people smile. But earning enough from commissions alone was tough. She told herself that if she could sell one major collection, maybe she could afford a better apartment, maybe even open a small gallery. In moments of daydream, she imagined her paintings displayed on crisp white walls while she toasted potential buyers with a glass of sparkling cider. For now, though, the part-time job would have to do. Today was her day off, and she had decided to start it with a routine visit to the local grocery store. She liked that old brick building, with squeaky shopping carts and a cranky manager who swore he'd seen Maplewood transform from farmland into city blocks. She planned to buy fresh vegetables for a hearty soup and perhaps a little treat, maybe a slice of tiramisu from the bakery section. As she crossed the parking lot, her hair caught a playful gust of wind, whipping strands across her face. She brushed them aside and noticed a man struggling near the automatic doors, juggling paper bags that looked ready to fall apart at any second. He seemed out of place in a crisp button-down shirt and dark jeans that fit him a bit too well for typical Maplewood casual. And he was tall, maybe just over 6 feet. She glimpsed a bit of a scuffed sneaker peeking out from beneath his pant leg, which gave him a slightly disheveled air, as though he'd dressed in a hurry. Within seconds, one of the bags tore at the bottom. Apples, oranges, and a pack of pasta scattered onto the sidewalk. Sophie rushed forward, ignoring the swirl of people stepping around him. He was crouched down, trying to scoop up everything before it rolled away. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice light, as she knelt to gather produce that had decided to make a break for freedom. His expression combined frustration with relief. "Oh, yes, please," he said, as though he couldn't quite believe a stranger was willing to help. His voice was a little breathless. He picked up a rolling can of tomato sauce and tried to stuff it into a half-torn bag. "I didn't realize how heavy these groceries would be. I might have overestimated how much I could carry." Sophie smiled. "Happens to me all the time. They really should hand out free shopping carts in the parking lot." She offered the man the fruit she'd gathered. "You might want to get a sturdier bag inside." He nodded sheepishly. "That's a good idea." He scrambled to balance everything in his arms. Now that he was closer, she could see that his hair was neatly cut, a chestnut brown that caught the morning light. His eyes were a calm gray-blue like a hidden lake, but they carried an unmistakable weight, as though he had a million things on his mind. "Thank you, by the way. I'm usually not this clumsy, but apparently my coordination took a day off." Sophie laughed softly. "No worries. Sometimes the day has plans for us before we even get started." She paused, noticing a faint accent in his voice, something refined but not in a flashy way. She couldn't place it immediately, but it reminded her of someone who traveled widely. "I can hold that bag for you while you get a new one." "Thanks," he said, handing her one of the sagging paper sacks. "My name, Daniel." "Sophie," she replied. "Nice to meet you." She wondered if she should help him all the way to his car, but he didn't seem to have a car waiting. Instead, he walked back into the store, heading straight to the customer service desk, leaving Sophie with the groceries. She stood there a little awkwardly, not sure if she should follow. In a few moments, Daniel returned, carrying 2 fresh, sturdy canvas bags from the store's promotion rack. Together, they transferred the items. He thanked her profusely, and she couldn't help but notice that behind his polite warmth, there was a hint of self-consciousness, like he wasn't used to accepting help. She offered a quick smile and then went her own way. That should have been the end of it, but it was. She took her time wandering the aisles, collecting her ingredients, letting her mind drift to new watercolor ideas, half thinking about how Daniel's shirt looked tailored and his jeans looked expensive, but also feeling that might just be her imagination. After all, Maplewood had its fair share of stylish people. By the time she got in line at the cashier, she spotted Daniel a few lanes down, removing items from the cart with a certain carefulness, as though double-checking every purchase. He spotted her and offered a friendly wave. She waved back, then turned her attention to loading her own groceries onto the conveyor belt. She didn't give him another thought until she stepped outside, groceries in hand, and found him standing at the bus stop, balancing those two canvas bags. The morning bus she took had passed 20 minutes ago, so clearly he was waiting for the next one or maybe a different route. She couldn't help raising an eyebrow. She'd half expected him to have a neat little sedan or something a bit more luxe. She pushed aside the assumption that his clothes signaled wealth. Maybe he dressed well just because it boosted his confidence. People did that all the time. He caught her eye and gave a quick, slightly embarrassed smile. "Looks like we're both bus riders," he said. She returned the smile, feeling silly for reading too much into his outfit. "Bus Riders United," she joked, nodding at his groceries. "If you live close, walking could be easier, but with that many bags, maybe not." He shrugged. "I thought about walking, but it's a bit of a trek. I just moved into a place near the old library." "Nice area," Sophie commented. "Lots of big trees and older houses with character. I actually live about 3 blocks from that library. Old building with the lion statues out front." He nodded. "That's the one. They're kind of charming, right? Though they definitely need a fresh coat of paint." They made small talk until the bus rolled up, then boarded together. The ride was only 15 minutes, but in that time she learned that he'd just moved from out of state and was in Maplewood for a new position. He didn't elaborate, and she sensed he was either private or shy. Either way, she didn't pry. She told him about her cafe job and her dream of having an art gallery. He listened with genuine interest. Before she realized it, the bus had arrived at her stop. Daniel promptly stood to let her pass. "Good luck with your new place," she said, stepping into the aisle. He offered a faint, thoughtful smile. "Thanks, and I hope your art career takes off soon, Sophie. Something tells me you'll make it happen." She hopped off the bus, feeling oddly buoyed by his encouragement. People were nice in Maplewood, but there was something about Daniel's warmth that lingered in her mind. Shaking off the lingering curiosity, she walked the last few blocks home and started her day in earnest, pushing him to the back of her thoughts. That might have been the final time she saw him, just two strangers who shared an awkward moment and parted ways. But Maplewood had a funny way of bringing people back into each other's paths. Sophie's life continued with her usual rhythms, opening shifts at the cafe, late nights painting, budgeting carefully, and occasionally meeting friends for quiet dinners. A couple of weeks later, she was at work, taking an early lunch break by the cafe window. She glanced up as the bells on the door jingled. In walked Daniel, wearing a crisp white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, looking slightly out of place among the cafe's bohemian decor. He spotted Sophie and smiled. "This is where you work?" he asked. "I was passing by and needed coffee. I'm not stalking you, I promise." Sophie let out a laugh. "Lucky timing, I make a pretty mean cappuccino." She gestured for him to come to the counter. "Is that your drink, or do you prefer something else?" He paused thoughtfully. "Let's go with a cappuccino, and maybe a slice of that blueberry tart." "You got it." She prepared his order, taking pride in every swirl of foam. The cafe was known for artistic latte designs, so she drizzled a gentle heart in the foam, then realized she might be sending the wrong signal. She told herself it was the standard design she did for everyone, yet her cheeks felt warm anyway. Daniel didn't seem to read too much into it, or if he did, he gave no indication. He paid, left a tip, and lingered by the counter as though he had more to say. They ended up chatting about local art galleries, which ones he'd visited, which ones he still needed to see. Sophie loved how genuinely curious he was. He asked about her watercolor style, how she found inspiration, whether Maplewood's character shaped her art. He seemed especially intrigued that she was still on the cusp of turning her passion into a viable career, like he understood that uncertain place between dreams and reality. She was about to return to work when he said, "Would you ever show me your paintings? I mean, if you're comfortable sharing them." Sophie blinked, flattered and startled. "Sure, I have an online portfolio, but some pieces are physically stored in my apartment. It's a mess there, but if you really want to see them, I'd be happy to show you." He nodded, a dimple appearing in his left cheek when he smiled. "I'd like that." Their second meeting ended on a hopeful note, though Sophie still couldn't pin down who Daniel was in Maplewood or what he did. He never mentioned specifics, and she hadn't pressed. She chalked it up to him being a private person. People had all kinds of reasons to keep their personal life discreet. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Sophie kept bumping into each other around town, once at the neighborhood farmer's market, another time at a bookstore. Maplewood had plenty of places to go, so it felt like more than coincidence. Their conversations always flowed easily. He was well-traveled, could converse about classic literature, business trends, or local gossip with equal finesse, and seemed genuinely supportive of her dreams. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench outside a local pastry shop, splitting an apple turnover, Sophie found the courage to invite him to her place. "If you really want to see my paintings, maybe come by next weekend. I'll be done with my shift around 4. It's just a tiny apartment, so you've been warned." He gave her a warm look. "I'd love to." The following weekend, she tidied her studio apartment as much as possible, clearing half-finished sketches from her desk and propping larger watercolors along the walls. She couldn't stop herself from wondering if Daniel would judge her cluttered living conditions. The building was older, the walls thin enough that on a quiet night, she could hear her neighbor's television. But it was home, and it was all she could afford. When Daniel arrived, he took in the space with thoughtful eyes. He admired her paintings leaning against every wall, depictions of Maplewood streets at sunrise, a row of pastel houses by the river, a whimsical scene of children chasing bubbles in the park. His quiet reverence made Sophie's heart flutter with pride. "These are incredible," he said softly, his voice brimming with sincerity. "You capture the warmth of Maplewood so well. It's like you see the kindness in everyday life here and paint it." She smiled, relieved. "Thank you, you have no idea how much that means." "I do," Daniel replied, setting down a painting gently. "Art shapes how we perceive the world. You have a real gift." That compliment should have been a high point in the evening, but Sophie couldn't help noticing that while he praised her art, he carefully sidestepped any personal details about himself. Every time she asked about his new position, he gave a vague answer, something about business consultations, strategic planning, or a new real estate venture. He didn't flaunt anything, didn't brag, but he also kept his world well guarded, as though building a moat around any personal specifics. A gentle frustration settled in her chest, but she reminded herself that people opened up at their own pace. Daniel had a good heart, that much she could see. She'd wait for him to share more when he was ready. They began seeing each other more frequently. Sometimes it was coffee, sometimes a stroll through the local park. Little by little, they learned each other's quirks. Sophie's fear of thunder, Daniel's distaste for sweet pickles, her love of old musicals, his weakness for elaborate board games. Flirting came naturally, but so did genuine friendship. And all the while, small hints kept surfacing that there was more to Daniel than met the eye. One evening, he insisted on paying for dinner at a modest family-owned restaurant. When Sophie protested, saying it was too expensive, he smiled and said, "Don't worry about it," as though money were no issue at all. Another time, Sophie thought she glimpsed an expensive watch on his wrist, silver with an elegant crest, but he slipped it under his cuff when he noticed her curiosity. She had also overheard a tense phone call once, where Daniel whispered in the hallway, "I'm handling it, but please don't involve my father yet." Part of her suspected that he might be from a wealthy family, or that he was involved in bigger business deals than he let on. But the idea of him as a millionaire felt too far-fetched, like the plot of a cheap romance novel. So she stayed silent, afraid of appearing shallow if she asked outright, or worse, told him she suspected he was rich when maybe he was just scraping by in a nicer shirt. Their closeness led to a flicker of romance, gentle hand-holding, quiet confessions about childhood dreams. She found herself drawn to him, his gentleness, the way he made her feel seen. Yet there remained a quiet tension, an underlying sense that he was keeping a part of himself locked away. She worried that if she learned what it was, maybe it would ruin everything. A month went by. Sophie's friends teased her that she looked more radiant, joking that her new man was good for her. She blushed and changed the subject. She wasn't even sure if they were officially dating. They hadn't defined anything. But the more time she spent with Daniel, the more she realized she wanted something lasting. One afternoon, she got a text from him asking if she could meet him at a fancy restaurant downtown. She'd never been there. It was known for white tablecloths, elegant lighting, and live piano music. The reservation was at 7 p.m., and she spent half the afternoon deciding on her outfit. She settled on a simple navy dress, hoping to look elegant but not overdone. She had no idea why he'd chosen such an upscale place. Was he celebrating something? Was it a special date? Nervous excitement fluttered in her stomach as she arrived. But the moment she walked inside, the mood felt off. Daniel was seated at a corner table, wearing a crisp black suit that looked tailored. His posture was tense, and across from him sat an older man with a refined air and a clear look of impatience. When Sophie approached, Daniel leaped to his feet, quickly introducing her to the man as George Stanton, my father's associate. George offered a tight smile, barely cordial. "Good to meet you," he said, then turned back to Daniel. "I'm afraid we must continue our discussion. Time is of the essence." Sophie felt like she was intruding on a business meeting, and the tension made her skin prickle. Daniel gently touched her arm. "I'll explain in a moment," he whispered, pulling out her chair. She sat, unsure of what was happening. George continued, "Your father wants the final numbers by next week, Daniel. If you don't move forward, he'll take matters into his own hands. The legacy of the Beaumont family can't be put on hold because you're not ready." Sophie blinked, the words swirling in her mind. Beaumont family? Legacy? She glanced at Daniel, whose face had grown stony. She'd never heard his last name before. He always just said Daniel. Her heart pounded as she realized she'd stumbled upon something huge. Daniel tried to remain calm. "I told you I'm weighing the acquisition carefully. The Maplewood development project is something I want to do differently. My father is used to a more aggressive expansion approach, but I want to consider local impacts." George's mouth twitched. "Your father built Beaumont Holdings by taking calculated risks. If you keep stalling, you risk losing that prime piece of property. I'd advise you to sign off before we lose the seller's interest." He paused, eyeing Sophie with a flick of annoyance, as though she were an unwelcome witness. "We can settle this matter another time, but remember the family name is at stake." With that, George rose from his chair, gave Sophie a curt nod, and left. Daniel leaned back with a sigh, rubbing his temples. His eyes met Sophie's, and she could see the apology in them. Anxiety and adrenaline spiked through her veins. Beaumont Holdings, family name, this was not just any business situation. Was he from the Beaumont family, a lineage she'd vaguely heard about in news articles, something about large real estate developments and philanthropic efforts? This was well beyond the realm of normal. She felt abruptly out of her depths. He exhaled and reached for her hand, but she drew back on instinct, overwhelmed by confusion and hurt. "What is going on?" she asked, voice trembling despite her best effort to remain calm. Daniel's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry, I never wanted you to find out this way. My full name is Daniel Beaumont. My father is Hugh Beaumont, the CEO of Beaumont Holdings. I'm part of that family, yes, but I'm not comfortable with all the attention or assumptions that come with it." Her mind spun. She recalled random bits of conversation around Maplewood about the Beaumont family wanting to build a new hotel or upscale mall. Real estate moguls, big money. "So you're not just comfortable," she said softly. "You're wealthy. All those vague answers you gave me about your work, it was actually about multi-million-dollar deals." He nodded, misery etched into his face. "I'm the heir to that business. I'm supposed to take over someday. I moved to Maplewood because I genuinely want to handle the family's development project here. But I wanted to see the city through my own eyes, live like everyone else, not from inside a high-rise office or behind tinted car windows." I was tired of only meeting people who wanted something from me or who treated me differently because of my last name. Sophie felt a lump in her throat. She was furious he'd kept this secret, yet his explanation made sense in a heartbreaking way. That day outside the grocery store, you took the bus on purpose, didn't you? He nodded. I wanted to experience normal life. Growing up in that world, you learn to hide behind private cars and protective staff, but I wanted freedom from all that. She swallowed hard. Why didn't you just tell me the truth, Daniel? Did you think I'd freak out, or that I'd treat you differently? He looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. Yes, partly. I've had so many relationships fail because once someone found out I was wealthy, everything changed. They either saw me as a meal ticket or someone to show off. I know that sounds cynical, but it's what I've experienced. With you, everything felt so real. You didn't want anything from me but my company. She took a trembling breath. I get that, but do you realize how humiliating it is to find out like this, with some stranger basically announcing that you're the heir to a fortune? He reached again for her hand, and this time she let him take it. I'm sorry, Sophie, truly. The last thing I wanted was to hurt you. I planned to tell you soon, after I could be sure you believed I was just me. Her mind roiled with conflicting emotions, hurt, betrayal, empathy. She glanced around the fancy restaurant at the well-dressed patrons clinking wine glasses. It felt like stepping into another dimension, one she'd never fit into. I just need some time, she murmured, pulling her hand away softly. I need to process this. Daniel nodded, anguish clear in his eyes. He settled the bill without another word, and they left. Outside, a crisp evening breeze ruffled Sophie's hair. She stood on the sidewalk, hugging her arms around herself, fighting back tears. He offered to drive her home. She shook her head and quietly said she'd prefer to walk alone. In the following days, Sophie wrestled with swirling questions. Should she trust him? Was their connection real, or was he just playing out some big social experiment? Her friends were divided when she confided in them, some saying she should run, others saying it might be worth giving him a chance. She spent her nights painting in angry strokes, the colors a whirlwind of confusion and heartbreak. Daniel texted her a few times, apologizing, saying he missed talking to her, that he wished she'd let him explain more. She read his messages over and over, her heart torn between longing and caution. Eventually, she responded with a single sentence, "We need to talk face to face." They arranged to meet at a quiet part of the riverfront park the next evening. When Daniel arrived, he looked exhausted, as though he'd spent the days working or worrying nonstop. Or both. Sophie couldn't help recalling the gentle man who had asked to see her paintings. Her emotions seesawed between affection and hurt. She took a deep breath. I've thought about this a lot, she began. I'm upset you lied by omission, but I get why you did it. I don't love you any less for wanting normalcy. Still, I need to know if I can trust you. Daniel nodded, eyes red-rimmed with regret. Ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth, no more evasions, I promise. She hesitated, the question burning in her chest. Do you actually care about me, or was this just a way to see how regular people live? His eyes widened, pained. God, no, Sophie, these weeks we've spent, they've changed me. You've shown me a side of life I've never had. I haven't been this happy in a very long time. My interest in you is real. I'm terrified of losing you because of this secret. She looked at the gentle ripples on the river's surface, the setting sun painting the sky in purple and orange. I believe you, she whispered. I just feel so out of my league. I can barely afford rent. Meanwhile, you have entire development projects. Daniel reached for her hand, and this time she let him hold it. I'm still the same guy you met outside that grocery store, the one who can barely keep groceries in a bag. The money, the business, it's all so separate from who I am inside. If you want me to walk away from it all, I'll do it. I'll figure something out. She shook her head. Don't be silly, you have a life, responsibilities. I'm not asking you to give up your family or your legacy. I just want to know you won't hide from me again. And if we stay together, there's a whole world you come with, a big, complicated world. I'm scared of it. He squeezed her hand gently. So am I, but I'm more scared of not having you in my life. I'll do anything you need me to earn your trust again. They stood for a moment in silence, the hum of crickets filling the evening air. Slowly, Sophie stepped closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "I care about you," she confessed. "I want to see where this goes, but we have to be honest with each other and we have to move at a pace that doesn't scare me off." Daniel exhaled, relief evident. "Anything you need," he promised. They walked along the river, hand in hand, letting the twilight soothe their anxieties. He explained more about Beaumont Holdings, how he was expected to learn the ropes of the business by overseeing Maplewood's new development. She told him about her worry that she'd never measure up in his world of polished galas and charity dinners. He reassured her that money wasn't the measure of worth. He genuinely admired her determination, her compassion, and her talent. Somewhere in that conversation, they found an equilibrium between their drastically different backgrounds. A few days later, Sophie was in the middle of a busy shift at the cafe when Daniel walked in, looking energetic yet anxious. He asked if she had a moment. She sneaked him to a side table, ignoring the curious gazes of her coworkers. "I'm meeting with my father this weekend," Daniel said quietly. "He's flying in. I want you there. I want him to see who I've been talking about, who makes me want to approach business more thoughtfully." Her stomach flipped with nerves. "That's a big step, Daniel." He reached for her hand. "I know, but you matter to me. And well, I want him to realize that. I don't want to hide you or hide from my family anymore." Sophie hesitated, eyes darting around. She remembered feeling so out of place in the fancy restaurant with George. How much more intimidating would it be to meet the Beaumont patriarch himself? And yet, she saw in Daniel's face that this was his olive branch, his way of proving he wasn't ashamed or afraid of who he was with her. "Okay," she finally said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'll go." That same day, in the lull between the lunch crowd and the afternoon rush, Sophie felt an urge to share something else with him, something personal. She motioned him closer, as if letting him in on a secret. "Daniel, sometimes timing changes everything, just like subscribing to this channel seems to bring unexpected surprises. But back to the story. I have a confession. I'm thinking of submitting my portfolio to a big art showcase in the city next month. I'm terrified, but maybe it's time I took a risk too." He smiled at her analogy, then his expression turned gentle and encouraging. "You should do it. You're more than ready, and I'll be by your side." She felt a surge of warmth at his reassurance, relieved that their conversation shifted from million-dollar deals to her own creative dreams, as if bridging both worlds in that moment. The weekend arrived faster than Sophie would have liked. She found herself in front of an opulent hotel suite door, heart hammering against her ribcage. Daniel squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before they stepped inside. The suite was spacious, tastefully decorated with modern art. Large windows showed Maplewood's skyline from an angle Sophie had never seen, like a miniature city beneath them. Standing by a sleek marble counter was a man in his late 50s or early 60s, Hugh Beaumont. He radiated a confident air that came from years of boardroom negotiations and philanthropic functions. He turned, eyeing Sophie with curiosity that bordered on scrutiny. Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, this is Sophie." She mustered a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Beaumont." He offered a reserved nod. "Likewise." He turned his gaze back to Daniel. "Shall we discuss the Maplewood project then, son?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, but Sophie's presence is important to me. She's seen Maplewood from a resident's perspective. Her insights matter." Hugh inhaled, glancing briefly at Sophie with an expression that tried to be cordial but remained guarded. "All right, I'm open to hearing various perspectives." Sophie took a seat, trying not to feel too intimidated by the plush surroundings and the palpable father-son tension. Over the next hour, father and son spoke about land acquisitions, community impact, profit margins, and timelines. Sophie was struck by Daniel's poised approach. He wanted to preserve Maplewood's charm while also expanding business. Hugh was more blunt, emphasizing returns on investment and brand reputation. Occasionally, he'd ask Sophie what locals cared about. She answered honestly. She spoke about small businesses thriving, the local farmers market, preserving historical buildings, and how Maplewood's sense of close-knit community couldn't be replaced. By the end of the meeting, Hugh looked weary but more thoughtful. "You've changed since you moved here," he said to Daniel. "Less impulsive, more empathetic. I suppose that's good, though I need assurance you'll still close the deal." Daniel leaned forward. "I won't let the family down, but I want to ensure the development benefits Maplewood too." Hugh's gaze slipped to Sophie once more, a hint of grudging respect in his eyes. "Perhaps you have reason to consider the local angle so strongly." He cleared his throat. "A final decision will need to be made soon, Daniel. This project has been in limbo for weeks." Daniel nodded. "I understand." When Hugh departed for another engagement, leaving father and son on somewhat improved terms, Sophie could finally breathe. She didn't completely trust Hugh's mild acceptance, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Daniel turned to her, relief evident on his face. "Thank you for being here. That couldn't have been easy." She shook her head with a hesitant smile. "It wasn't as terrifying as I expected." She paused. "He loves you in his own way, Daniel. He just has a very corporate lens." Daniel sighed. "Yes, he's had to be strong to keep the business afloat and expand it, but I want to do things differently." Over the next few weeks, Sophie and Daniel navigated a new phase of their relationship. The secrecy was gone, replaced by the challenge of blending his billionaire responsibilities with her modest, artistic life. There were moments of strain, her hearing about large sums of money tossed around as though it were nothing, him struggling to assure business partners that his new approach wouldn't sabotage profits. The local rumor mill buzzed about sightings of Daniel Beaumont all over Maplewood, especially after the official news broke that the Beaumont heir was living in the city to oversee the next big development. Sophie's friends were wide-eyed. "You're dating the Beaumont heir?" they squealed in disbelief. "Girl, you're living a fairy tale." But it didn't feel like a fairy tale when Daniel got phone calls at midnight about urgent business deals or had to dash away from a date to put out some corporate fire. Still, they found reasons to smile. Spontaneous coffee breaks, quiet dinners where Daniel tried to learn how to cook from her. She realized that despite the grand scale of his life, he was just a man trying to forge his own path. A new tension arose when she overheard whispers at a gallery opening that Beaumont Holdings might demolish some older apartment buildings near the library to make room for a new complex. That included the building she lived in. Panic gnawed at her. She confronted Daniel that night, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "Are they planning to tear down my home? My neighbors' homes?" Daniel was aghast. "That's not finalized. I didn't even know your building was on the list of potential demolitions. We're considering renovating other properties, but I'll do everything I can to protect your place. You have my word." She studied his face, searching for sincerity. "People have nowhere else to go, Daniel. Don't let the business uproot families just to build something new and shiny." He nodded firmly. "I'll fight for it, I promise." True to his word, Daniel pushed back in the business meetings. He showed them the importance of preserving communities. He proposed alternative sites that wouldn't displace current residents. It wasn't easy. Hugh and the board balked at the new approach, calling it sentimental and cautioning that delaying or relocating the project would cost them more money. But Daniel pressed on. Sophie marveled at his resolve, her heart swelling with admiration. The man who once clumsily lost his groceries was standing up to an entire boardroom for everyday folks. Their relationship grew deeper through this shared challenge. Sophie felt grateful that he cared about more than profit, and Daniel felt a sense of purpose that he'd never fully known before. They had more honest conversations about money, about her lingering insecurities around his lifestyle. He insisted that her voice mattered to him in business and in life. As weeks turned into months, they found a delicate balance. Word spread around Maplewood of a more humane approach to Beaumont Holdings development. Although local newspapers remained skeptical, calling it a PR move, many residents were cautiously optimistic. Meanwhile, Sophie poured her heart into finishing a new series of paintings. She aimed to capture Maplewood's transformation, pastel scenes that included older buildings blending with modern architecture, underscoring that the city had room for both old and new. The night before the big art showcase she'd finally decided to enter, Sophie was a bundle of nerves. Daniel came over to her apartment, offering moral support. He found her pacing amid canvases lined up against the wall. She shook her head, biting her lip. I'm terrified no one will like them, or that people will buy them just because I'm the girlfriend of the Beaumont heir. I don't want my art overshadowed by your name. Daniel gently took her hands, steadying her. Sophie, your talent stands on its own. Anyone who sees your work will recognize that. But if you want, I can stay in the background, not draw attention. I'll be invisible if that makes you more comfortable. She paused, tears welling in her eyes. No, you shouldn't have to hide. I just want to be recognized for who I am, too. He kissed her softly on the forehead. You will be, I'm proud of you. Everything you create is full of heart. The following evening, the gallery bustled with activity. Artists displayed their creations in neat booths, while potential buyers and local art enthusiasts roamed, sipping wine and discussing color palettes. Sophie trembled with anticipation. Daniel was there, discreetly supportive, not flaunting his identity but occasionally making conversation with visitors who recognized him. Her paintings garnered plenty of interest. People admired her unique style, the layering of gentle watercolors that captured Maplewood's soul. Midway through the event, an elderly couple approached Sophie, marveling at a painting of the old library at dusk. It showcased the lion statues in a dreamy swirl of twilight purples and gold. The couple expressed that they'd lived in Maplewood for decades, and her painting captured the spirit they remembered. They bought it on the spot, tears of nostalgia shining in their eyes. Sophie's heart soared. This was exactly why she painted, to evoke memories and emotions. More sales followed. By the end of the night, she'd sold several pieces. The gallery owner complimented her, hinting that if she kept producing such work, she might be able to stage a solo exhibition. Sophie was over the moon, her face glowing with triumph. She found Daniel, who embraced her tightly, whispering how proud he was. At that moment, she realized how far they'd come since the day she helped him pick up fallen groceries. It felt like a lifetime ago. She marveled at the resilience they both showed to reach this point, she with her anxious dream of making it as an artist, and he with the burden of balancing family legacy with personal conscience. They had faced obstacles, misunderstandings, fear of not belonging, and yet here they stood. The next big trial came not long after, when a legal snag threatened to derail Daniel's proposed alternative site for the development. Hugh and some board members insisted they revert to the original plan, demolishing the older buildings near the library. Sophie's building sat on that list like a ticking time bomb. Daniel went into crisis mode. Meetings dragged late into the night. Meanwhile, Sophie tried to prepare her neighbors, explaining that if the board forced the plan, they might need to mobilize the community. Tension reached a breaking point during one high-stakes conference call. Sophie sat quietly in the corner of Daniel's apartment. His place was far more upscale than hers, with modern furniture, tall windows, and a view of the city's skyline. She listened as Hugh grilled his son over the phone. Stop fighting the tide, Daniel. This is business, not a personal playground. If you can't push this through, I might have to step in and do it myself. Daniel's jaw clenched. We can expand without destroying people's homes, he argued, knuckles tight around his phone. I've reviewed the numbers. Yes, it might cost us a bit more upfront to relocate, but in the long run, a community-friendly approach boosts our reputation. We won't be known as the family that wrecks neighborhoods. Hugh's voice wavered with frustration. Your idealism is admirable, but we can't jeopardize the business over it. I'll find a compromise, Daniel insisted, voice unwavering. After he hung up, he sat there in silence, hands trembling slightly. Sophie knelt beside him. I'm sorry this is so hard, she whispered. He turned his gaze to her, eyes filled with determination. I won't give up, no matter how long it takes. In the end, it was Daniel's perseverance and a bit of luck that shifted the board's stance. He managed to secure a delayed timeline and a different property closer to the city's outskirts, forging a deal that satisfied most stakeholders. Hugh begrudgingly admitted that Daniel's approach might protect the company's reputation in an era of growing social awareness. The older building near the library, including Sophie's apartment, was saved from demolition. Local papers praised the new direction of Beaumont Holdings, crediting Daniel for the pivot. When Daniel told Sophie the news, she teared up, overwhelmed by relief. They celebrated with a quiet dinner in her little apartment. No white tablecloths or grand piano, just warm soup, soft music, and a sense of peace about the future. The final emotional turning point came a few weeks later when Daniel invited Sophie to a Beaumont family charity gala. She hesitated. This was the type of formal event she'd only seen in magazines. He convinced her, saying it was time for her to see his world on full display, without pretense or half-truths. His father would be there, along with high-profile philanthropists and business luminaries. Sophie wore a modest but elegant dress in a deep emerald shade. Daniel introduced her to various business leaders, never once letting go of her hand. She gleaned from subtle glances that some people were surprised, maybe even disapproving, that the Beaumont heir was with someone outside the typical social circles. But Daniel stood by her, proud and unbothered. They found Hugh mid-conversation with an investor, and when Sophie approached, Hugh offered a polite smile. "It's good to see you again," Sophie said, summoning courage to meet his gaze. Hugh nodded. "Likewise, Daniel tells me your art show was a success. Congratulations." She thanked him, surprised by his civility. Perhaps, in his own way, Hugh was starting to accept that his son was forging a different path, one influenced by the kind of empathy Sophie brought out in him. Later that night, after countless introductions and polite small talk, Daniel led Sophie out to a small balcony overlooking a manicured garden strung with fairy lights. The faint music from inside provided a romantic backdrop. He turned to face her, an intensity in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "You know, I've never felt as free as I do now," he murmured. "My father hasn't fully changed, but I see glimmers of respect for what I'm doing in Maplewood, and I have you to thank for showing me why it matters." She smiled softly. "You did the hard work yourself. I just reminded you that real lives were at stake, including mine." He let out a gentle laugh. "That's a pretty big motivator, I admit." Then his expression turned serious. "Sophie, I know we've had our share of struggles, secrets, pressure, misunderstandings, but despite all of it, I can't imagine my life without you. I." Her heart pounded, breath catching in her throat. She'd seen that look in his eyes only once before, the night he confessed everything at the park. But now it brimmed with even more certainty. She could practically sense his next words. "I love you," Daniel said, voice steady, filled with warmth. "Truly, I never want us to hide who we are, rich, poor, artist, businessman. None of that matters as much as what we share here." He gently pressed his fingertips against her heart. Sophie's eyes flooded with tears. For a moment, all the formalities of the gala, the complexities of business deals, and the tension of living in two different worlds melted away. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling like both a surrender and a triumph. He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned her head against his chest, letting the steady beat of his heart calm her. The night air was cool on her skin, but his warmth enveloped her. The hush of the garden, the distant laughter from inside, and the soft glow of the lights made everything feel like a gentle dream. She remembered that first day, crouching on a sidewalk to help a clumsy man with his groceries, never imagining the journey it would spark. And now here she stood in a setting worlds away from that sidewalk, but with the same man, only now she knew him in all his complexity and richness of spirit. Their story didn't end there, of course. There would be more obstacles, a demanding father, a corporate environment that expected results, and her own blossoming art career that would soon take her to art fairs in bigger cities. But in that embrace, they both understood they'd choose each other over and over again. They had discovered that wealth and status could be overshadowed by something far more valuable: compassion, honesty, and love. And for Sophie Mendoza and Daniel Beaumont, that was a secret worth sharing with the world.